Hey folks, this episode of The Prior Transformation is a Founder Friday edition that's 2 years in the making. I recorded this 2 years ago with a friend of mine named Jordi Matsumoto, who's the founder and CEO of Marching Penguin, a digital production studio here in LA. They work with primarily Fortune 500s like Ford and Burger King and HP. And they also work with some smaller clients as well. So Jordi's got some great experience working with a broad range of folks, and that really kind of shows through in this conversation. We talk a lot about managing client expectations. We talk about what it means to be a founder. We talk about recruiting. A lot of juicy nuggets in this one. And Jordi's a really smart guy. He went to the London School of Economics, and he's a debate champion. And he's also one of the only people I know. I mean, I think there's probably a handful of people I know that can integrate information and ideas and thoughts and skills from a bunch of different areas to be effective. He's really good at that. So we talk about a lot in this conversation. I hope you guys like it. And like I said, it took 2 years to get this out. So enjoy. Welcome to the Prior Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, actually, there's no we, it's just I. I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy. Welcome back. I'm here with Jordi Matsumoto, the founder and CEO of Marching Penguin. Did I pronounce your name right?
It's close enough. Yeah, it's good. It's a good try.
How's it pronounced?
It's Matsumoto.
Matsumoto.
Yeah.
I'll get better, I promise.
It's all good.
I probably should be able to pronounce your name at this point.
Yeah.
I've known you for long enough. Anyway, thanks for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start off and hear, the origin story behind Marching Penguin, why you started the company.
So, the short of it is, I think I always knew I wanted to start a company. I come from a pretty academic family, actually. I'm, I think, pretty much the only one, along with one of my cousins, that doesn't have a PhD. So, a very academic-oriented, research-oriented, pragmatic family. And out of that, you don't typically have a lot of entrepreneurs. But for me, I think I always had that. You might call it being willful or independent, but this desire to create, something outside of the confines of, a job or a corporation. So I always, in my early career, found myself doing side projects and creative things. And, I always knew I wanted to be within advertising and filmmaking in particular. Any sort of moving picture storytelling was exciting to me. And so, I was coming up at the end of some time with a major ad agency, Moxie Interactive, and basically, had some decisions to make about the next steps in my career and thought, it's now or never. And so it was actually a pretty spontaneous endeavor. I didn't really have a business plan. They always say, you should have a business plan and goals and all that. I literally just kind of one day said, hey, I'm starting this business, and did it remotely.
Just leaped.
Just left, yeah.
So what did you give it? Left, yeah.
Yeah.
So what gave you that? What gave you that confidence to make that leap?
I don't know that I necessarily had confidence that I would succeed. It was more so just a confidence that I had a belief in myself. I knew that I could problem solve and figure it out. And I didn't necessarily think I was ever the smartest guy in the room, but I figured I could find the smartest people in the room and have them help me. And so that's been the journey most of the way. Is I've felt like I've always been learning, still learning. And, I rely heavily on people who are much more technical and savvier than me to really get the job done and execute. I tend to be a bit of a big picture thinker, but the execution is really about what do those folks who have a real specialization in cinematography or VFX or motion tracking or whatever the case may be, how do I get those people on my team and then pull that together to do something great for the client?
That's great. So let's just talk about that for a second. Recruiting. Recruiting is always very difficult for a lot of entrepreneurs and anybody who runs teams. How do you go about the recruiting process? How do you find those amazing folks?
I think for better or worse, we've always found that recruiting isn't a problem for us.
Wow.
And I know that's rare. I think part of the reason is we're in Los Angeles where, it still continues to be a place that is saturated with creative talent, particularly in the motion picture industry. So, there's absolutely no shortage of talented cinematographers, directors, art directors, and on and on. And so I think having that has always been nice. There's a surplus of talent. There's still a need to sort through all that talent. But I think that when you make recruitment a staple of your business, as opposed to something that comes up when there's an open position or, you find a business need to set up a requisition, but you actually make it part of the ongoing search for how your business is better, then you are always ahead. You always know a guy who does this or a gal who, does that. And so you always have a Rolodex of people to go to. And for us, we actually have over 1,000 different crew and contractors that are part of our network. And those are actually vetted folks. So folks that we've seen their work, we've had conversations with them, kind of put them through the paces of our own process to understand whether or not they can add value to a project that we do. And so we have close relationships with all of those folks. It's not just 1,000 people that we randomly don't know. It's those are the folks that we know, what they do, how they do it, to what degree are they capable, and how could they plug into a project.
So it sounds like it's almost like a pipeline, right? You have an ongoing pipeline of just potential recruits or different people for different jobs. Or what does that look like?
I think you could equate it to a pipeline, or in recruiting world, they use the word bench a lot. Mm-hmm. It's the idea of having a bench and kind of an extended bench. So we have our 1,000. On top of that, we've probably got another 10 to 20,000 that we've either gotten resumes from or talked to in the past few years. So it's like I said before, there's no shortage of people out there. It's more about the refinement of figuring out who's good and who can add value, and then bringing them into the fold.
Got it. So, one of the things I want to talk about, just kind of shifting gears a little bit, is producing video. And you're an expert at this, so I'd love to hear, and I think a lot of folks out there would like to hear, what mistakes people tend to make when they think about, making videos and hiring, a company to do video production. I'd love to kind of hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Please,
yeah,
do tell.
I think it's almost like a information overload. Be careful what you ask for. But the one thing I'll say right off the bat, and it's kind of a blanket statement, and this might come off the wrong way for someone who hasn't managed a video project or hasn't produced video on their own, and then has done other things that are difficult. So someone who's a developer, an architect, might kind of take offense to what I'm about to say, but I don't know of any sort of craft that's project-based or oriented around making something that can be more difficult than producing a video. And I think there are a lot of things that contribute that, but one of the most important things is that there's a time element to video that doesn't allow you to sort of plan for everything. So even if you have a $250,000, multi-million-dollar budget, you've got tons of resources and a crew of 50, there still are unpredictable factors, things that you cannot control, things like the weather. things like people getting sick. And while any business is susceptible to those things, the reality of video production is that you're reliant on that particular moment. And so if lightning strikes or something happens and it is the weather, it is someone getting sick, there's nothing that you can do to sort of depart from that moment. You're affected from it, and you're affected by it, and you have to deal with that situation. So I think anyone who deals with like major events, there's a parallel in that as well. So if you're doing an event for a presidential candidate, or you're doing a concert for a major artist, there's a similar level of stress and difficulty to managing all that. You can plan as much as you want, but at the end of the day, there's still a ton of variables that are out of your control, and the best that you can do is problem solve. So I think that if you understand that mentality going in, it's kind of like a long-winded way to get into it, but then you realize that there is actually no perfection in video production. Like, there is not a shoot that we've ever done that has gone perfectly. There's always room for improvement. There's always something that happened that came up that maybe we planned for it, but we still couldn't compensate for how to fix it in the moment. Something happened. And so I think that is the mindset you have to take with something like video, whether you are hiring a really high-end production company or you're trying to do it yourself and learn the ropes. So I think to get more specific, you want some more specifics, right?
Keep going,
The higher level. The more specific things I can say for anyone that wants to produce video is that the majority of where you can be successful comes from all of the pre-planning. A lot of people focus on the production itself. So like on site, or if you're doing something animated or motion graphics, it's, how are we animating it, or how is it coming together? Or the full downstream, the post-production itself. So if you've done a shoot, pulling together all the assets and then cutting them together, everyone kind of defaults to those steps. They kind of just jump to there, and they don't realize that it's kind of like that imagery when you think of an iceberg, that the top of it is just a little bit, but the majority of the iceberg is underwater. The majority production is underwater, right? That's pre-production. It's the foundation. It's the base, and people don't get that. That's where success comes from. And very little actually happens or varies within the production and the post-production itself. By the time you get to post-production, most of the damage or the success has already been established, So I think that's it. And to get specific about what you have to do in pre-production, the biggest place we see clients underinvest is in copywriting.
Okay.
Consistently we see clients want to copyright themselves. They want to skimp on copywriting. They don't want to pay a real copywriter. They want to go with someone who might be up and coming, who hasn't copywritten for a specific genre of video or production. And that gets you into a lot of trouble because, the copywriters that we work with, I've done quite a bit of copywriting myself. It is largely based on experience, right? And it's based on understanding that you're telling a story, and there are all those variables that I mentioned earlier on that can go wrong, that will go wrong, and writing those into a storyline that can actually be produced. So if that foundational element, your script, isn't rock solid from the beginning, you're doomed. Doesn't matter how good your director is, your cinematographer, your editor, they cannot save a bad script. And we see that all the time, right? We see even at the highest levels, the major studios produce movies that are a flop, and they end up being a flop not because they look bad. All the movies look great. They're lit well, they're cut well, the music's wonderful. It all goes back to story. So that's where you sort of live and die.
This all sounds very like, Sun Tzu, the battle's won before it's even fought kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So just thinking, talking more about that, those crisis scenarios, where you're shooting and it starts raining or something like that. How do you communicate and set expectations with the client so that the client understands that sometimes things happen during production and you just got to roll with it. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think this goes back to the big picture answer I gave earlier on, where like production is never perfect. I think, from a client standpoint, myself and anyone on my team, we spend a lot of time managing expectations about what's going to happen, what could happen, what's the best, what's the worst case scenario. And a lot of times this also gets back to money and resources, so I think there's a major disconnect between what certain things cost and what clients think that they'll cost. Mm-hmm. And so, that's our job, is to spend a lot of time helping clients understand that, when they show us a reference to a commercial that we know costs $5 million to produce, and they say, that's what I want to go for, and their budget's $25,000, that, we have a major chasm between, expectations on either side. And that's the biggest thing to manage, so, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it does. What do you think the root cause of that disconnect is between, like you said before, somebody showing you a $5 million ad and then, saying, I need this done for 25 grand. Like, what do you think is like the root cause of that thought process, from the client?
I think that there's an element, and I don't mean to say this in any way that's negative. I think it's just the reality of, who we are as human beings, is we all appreciate art to some extent, even if you're, a developer in Silicon Valley and you never touch art in your working day. You can still appreciate a piece of art. You can still appreciate a beautiful film. And so to a degree, we all yearn to connect with creativity and art making. And as a result, I think that also makes us vulnerable to the realities of how complex and sophisticated it can be. And so it's this instance where time and again, clients and even, filmmakers starting out, when I've, been earlier in my career, it's this case of, my eyes are bigger than my stomach, right? I think like, oh yeah, like the creative juices are flowing and I feel like I can do this, and, I'm not really grounded in what reality truly is. So, for clients, it's that humanity of wanting to connect with art and wanting to be a part of it that can actually be something that makes them very vulnerable to, what it is. And that's also because art and, video production, all of this is very, it's subjective, it's stylistic, it's not as tangible as something like a car or a building. If I show you a Ferrari, you don't inherently question how much that might cost. You might be off by, $10, $30, $50,000, but you're not going to be off by the increments that our clients are sometimes off. And so because it's not as tangible, it's hard to understand, what went into it. And the other thing too is we're, probably to a lesser degree, but we're very accustomed to seeing very beautiful things on TV and seeing really great video production. So we've sort of become accustomed to this idea that that's the way it is. And that has made us spoiled, I think, to how difficult and complex, the engine is that creates video production and creates the beautiful things that we see.
So just like almost like the consistent availability of like really high quality production makes it seem like the production is cheaper than it really is.
Yeah. Like imagine growing up in your entire life, all you did was eat at 5-star restaurants, right? And then you went out, but you never paid the bill. It's like the parents always picked up the bill, right? You ate, and you had foie gras and all these like beautiful, like decadent things imported from all around the world. And then you leave the nest and you go out on your own, and you pull your pocketbook out and go to pay for your first meal, and all of a sudden it hits you. It's like there's this disconnect of what that meal costs versus going to Chipotle or wherever else, you know.
Got it. Okay, so I want to just shift gears for a second to talk about you. So, why entrepreneurship? You know, why not be a dog walker or a researcher? You said a lot of folks in your family are researchers. You know, but you kind of talked about it before, but I just want to kind of get into that some more. Like, what about entrepreneurship drew you into it?
I mean, for me personally, it's about creation, and that might be ironic because I'm in a creative segment of entrepreneurship. But I think regardless of if I was in, you know, digital advertising, video production, or in, you know, making microphones or building cars, it's still that idea of creating something and having, you know, for better or worse, full control over it, you know. So if you are an architect, you know, you get to see something come to life. You know, if you're able to look at every single detail and influence that, and I think there's both, you know, a power and a beauty to that endeavor. It can also be very scary and humbling, right? Because most entrepreneurs at some point fail, and they usually fail pretty hard. So, you know, there's obviously a downside to it, but you know, I think it's worth the risk.
You think it's like deliberate risk seeking, or is it like an action sports thing for you, or is it?
Might be a bit of a risk seeking thing. You know, I think we're all seeking to find a comfort zone that provides us with enough stimulus. And so I think that's why if you know, take a job out of college and you're bored out of your mind, there's probably a reason related to how stimulated you are with that job. You know, it's like, did you take it because your parents said it would be a good idea? Was it pragmatic? Did you take it because you were going to make a lot of money? You know, or did you take it because you were truly stimulated? Like you felt like you would be challenged. You interviewed with a manager that challenged you from the get-go, and you said, wow, this is going to really like invigorate me and make me think and grow as a person. I think that's what drives most of us beyond the money and the accolades. And so entrepreneurship is a way to get to this idea of stimulus, of, okay, like my mind is working. And, you know, I think in entrepreneurship, for better or worse, maybe it's working a little bit too much and around the clock, right? As you know, as an entrepreneur, it's like 24/7, you're thinking about that idea or that new launch or that initiative and how to perfect it, and, you know, whether you're meeting the deadlines and the goals that you've established. And so, you know, but it is all about like staying stimulated and being alive and a human being.
So how do you balance seeking out that stimulus with, you know, the potential for financial ruin? You know, like it's kind of, that's always something that's kind of in the corner of your thoughts. At least my thoughts is that, you know, I'm obviously, my entire brain capacity is being used by my venture, or any venture that I work on. But, you know, kind of in the corner of my eye is death, always like, you know, looming. You know, so how do you know, what advice would you give people to balance that, you know, that stimulus versus the potential of loss?
Well, I guess if you could clarify a little bit, because you talked about a couple losses there. You talked about loss of life, and then you talked about loss of money. So I guess... Yeah, you know,
I talk about death almost as in, you know, the character of death, you know, the guy with the sickle. But I think more in terms of death as in like financial ruin, just, you know, an event that's non-favorable. And it's always kind of looming there, and you know, it's always in the thoughts. But you know, on one side of the spectrum, you could basically just take a regular 9-to-5 job, you know, and never have to worry about that potential ever. And then on the other end, you can kind of go out on your own and, you know, be constantly worried about that and constantly have that on your mind. How do you find that balance, you know, if you're doing entrepreneurship?
Well, again, I think coming from a very pragmatic family, I have a very pragmatic approach to it, which is Yeah, I've never believed in going all in financially on anything, because the incremental difference of going, say, and I'm just kind of spitballing numbers, but putting 50% of my life savings into something compared to, 90% or 95%. I don't think that is what inherently drives your success. So you're playing with fire. You're deceiving yourself into thinking that it's the money and the capital. And I think that this is a bit, a wider discussion for the VC community and all of that kind of investment piece of it. But you are deceiving yourself in terms of what creates value and success and what drives growth in a business. So I'm very pragmatic in that way. I'll never go all in. I'll go in different degrees. I'll go all in relative to, a certain quarter or a year or, related to a project. You're constantly taking calculated risks, where maybe we have brought on a major Fortune 500 client and it's our first project with them, and we take it on the chin and almost take a loss, right? Not something that I recommend, something that you can do in services, different from a lot of product-based companies, but you can do it in services, and that can set you up to succeed later on, and that's a very calculated risk. In that instance, you're going all in, but that doesn't mean that I sold, the rights to the building that my company owns and the vans that transport our stuff and, the payroll that I have, the money that I have for payroll next month. It's like, no, I took a very specific risk on that project. And so as a result, even if that's a total catastrophic failure, I still have other places that I can go to. So I think that's what you have to balance. I mean, life is all about that. So yeah.
That's really interesting. So this notion of compartmentalizing risk. So trying to figure out if you're going to go all in, going all in a specific area where it's required, and then other areas staying safe. Is that kind of what you mean?
I think so. And a lot of this is also that you need to calibrate it based on, a lot of things that are personal. So it can be a risk tolerance. It can be potentially your personal obligations. Do you have a family to take care of? Those types of things should obviously influence how you judge what is the right amount of risk to be taking on and where to compartmentalize and where to not. But ultimately, you just have to a certain degree, be playing certain elements of your finances safe. It's just, smart to be doing that. It's almost like I look at it from the standpoint of any financial advisor will tell you to seek diversification. And that's the way I think you should treat your business. You can categorize it as an asset on its own, but I also think it should be a diversified asset. It's its own portfolio. And so, when you look at our finances, if I were to open up the books, I'd be able to show you that there is, certain investment in capital and gear and things that help improve our process. There are things that are more so rooted in marketing and business development, right? And you're sort of like calibrating in different cost centers, and you're creating this portfolio that, you're hoping can get you to your goals. And that's kind of the art of it, right? It's like figuring out what are the right allocations, where to budget, where to, put your foot on the gas a little bit more so that you can extend and either beat your competitors out or, get to the next level in the marketplace.
That's awesome. So let's just shift gears again. I want to jump into a quick fire, quick tips round. So I'll ask you just a few questions and, just tell me what, first comes up to your mind. So what do you wish you knew 2 years ago?
A lot. Yeah, that's a very loaded question. For a quick tips round, I think that I could probably write a novel about what I wish I knew 2 years ago.
Just try to distill it, maybe like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's the one nugget that I There's something that I knew from the beginning, and that mentors, friends, family I always mentioned, which is this idea of, knowing what your worth is. And I always carried that with me, but I think over the past few years, I've really come to understand how to execute against that philosophy. And so how do you understand, and this is really important in a services-based business, right, is like, what is your service worth? And, trying to look at that in very objective terms too, because our space in particular, there's constantly a race to the bottom. We've moved to a place where we finally said, ironically, even though we operate predominantly in a digital space, we don't do a lot of like broadcast type video production. We still actually position ourselves as more of a premium provider within that space, which isn't how we started out. But that all goes back again to knowing what our worth is and saying like, here are key reasons why we're worth this and the value that we bring to the table. I think if you can have a solid understanding of that, then things get a lot easier. They get easier with clients, they get easier with employees, contractors, because you know where you stand. But when you don't have a good bearing of what the worth is, then it's kind of a free-for-all. You're bidding left and right. You don't know whether the bid is accurate. You're hoping you'll win because you need the revenue. But really standing on like, know what your worth is.
That's great. That's actually a really good tip. What's one productivity tool that you use every day?
Is there one in particular you want me to talk to you about?
No, just generally.
Does it have to be one? Can I mention a few?
Yeah, just go crazy.
I'll go crazy, yeah. We use, for our project management, we use a system called 5 p.m., which we think is, we like its simplicity. Helps us keep organized on particular projects and break things down by project and task and assign different people to different tasks and projects. And we can also track hours on particular elements of a project. And so it allows us to keep very, very organized. And for a service-based company, it really allows us to be transparent across the board so clients can understand like, where do certain costs come from? Why did we get there? And we can know internally, like, is everything being reconciled correctly? So that's a great tool.
5 p.m.?
5 p.m.
Is that specific to production, or is that?
No, it's actually a very general tool, but we've just found it's been useful for us. The other thing we use is, as I'm sure you know, we're fans of Vesper, which is great. I wouldn't necessarily call it a productivity tool alone. I think that's, in some senses, underselling it. I mean, it's a little bit more dynamic because you've got both the AI and the human component to it. But at the end of the day, we're using that to, largely for me, to free up time from what are a lot of rudimentary, kind of basic tasks and scheduling and coordination and, pulling conference numbers and, making reservations, doing a lot of things that we almost take for granted how much time it takes up when you kind of put it together. And you look at across a week, how much time did I save when I, threw this over the fence to Vesper and the team, then, it can definitely be valuable.
Thank you for the ad there. Appreciate it.
Of course.
What's your favorite book?
Favorite book? That's a hard question.
Top 3.
That's harder.
We can come back to it.
Yeah, let's come back to it.
And then, what do you read on a daily basis? Any blogs or newspapers, magazines, anything? Tablets?
I've never been one to sort of stick to particular reading materials, and I think maybe that's a product of the internet age. It's like we are just bombarded with constant updates and new news sources and new channels for those news sources. So, I tend to be someone who, I think, as a byproduct of being in digital and in video production, constantly be experimenting and looking out for new things. So, I was like one of the first people to get a Roku and access content that way. That's kind of what led to us doing our yoga series, Breaking Down Dog. We had seen that Gaiam and a few of the other major players were doing content, and it was just in its infancy on Roku. This is like a number of years ago. So, that constant exploration helps to kind of stay cutting edge and see what's happening. And so, I've got a Roku and an Apple TV, and I've got an Amazon Fire, and those are all, video-based outlets for information. And I'm obviously on, my iPhone, but I also have Android products, and, constantly kind of using different outlets and up and coming media that are getting out there. And so, that's also, like, for instance, why we've done forays into 360 video, and we've got live stream projects that are coming up. So it's as a result of us constantly seeing and experimenting with
experimentation.
What's that?
That experimentation.
Yeah, it's an experimentation, and not really just saying these are the only media that I'm going to look at.
So that's great. I really do appreciate the chat today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the thought-provoking questions.
Anytime.